Dr. Kirwan, everybody that reads the newspaper and pays any attention at all to what's going on in Maryland, particularly in education, will recognize Dr. William England or English? Rick.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason why is because it's England, right? Okay, but Rick Kirwan is currently the Chancellor Emeritus and was the Chancellor of the Maryland University systems for a number of years. Because he is truly preeminent in Maryland in the field of education, he was asked to chair what is formally known as the Maryland Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, but as you have read, typically called the Kirwan Commission, which is charged with actually trying to figure out how we go from, I believe, 26th in the nation back up to where we belong, which is #1, but I'd be willing to accept #2. So, with no further ado, since we've already used up a fair amount of your time, thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
And it's an honor.
Now, what a great organization. I'm so impressed by the turnout, and this is well, how often do you meet?
Once a month, third Thursday of the month.
Wow, that's great. And in a way, I kind of feel like I've come back home, because when I was Chancellor for 13 years, I lived on Old Court Road. And there's a house there that the Chancellor lives in called Hidden Waters. So if you drive along Old Court Road, you might have noticed that at some point. So my wife and I had a wonderful time living in this community. And when I stepped down as Chancellor, we moved back down to Montgomery County, and as much as we loved Baltimore County, there was an attraction in Montgomery County. It's called grandchildren. I bet some of you can identify with it. Okay, well, I'm very pleased and honored, really, to be asked to talk a little bit about the Commission on Innovation and Excellence. And there's a lot of information, so I'm using a PowerPoint, but I'll be talking to the PowerPoint, and we'll welcome questions while I'm talking or when I finish, whatever. And I'm here this evening for as long as you need me. So let me, first of all, just, Tim mentioned it, the Commission on Innovation and Excellence. It's a 25-member commission, and it was appointed as a result, it came out of the 2016 legislative session, appointed by the governor and the General Assembly, jointly, bipartisan effort to pull together this commission. And it has a lot of whereases and whereases and whereases if you read the legislation. But if you boil it down to what's the commission supposed to do, there are basically two things. The commission is supposed to review the current funding formula and make recommendations on updating it. The current funding formula came out of the Thornton Commission, which passed legislation in 2002. And that created a funding formula for the state of Maryland. And when the legislature and the governor passed legislation endorsing the formula, and the governor signed it, they wrote into the bill that in some period of time, say 15 years, this should all be reviewed again and updated as needed. But they added another charge. The second charge. I mean, the first charge is kind of a fiscal question. You can kind of, that's get out a paper and pencil and go through the numbers and try to address the updating of the formula. But the second charge is, when you think about it, a very difficult, because this is that to design, develop, and recommend policies and practices so that Maryland's school system perform at the level of the world's best school system. Not the U.S., the world's best school system. Now, let me say, the commission didn't invent this charge. This is what the governor and the General Assembly gave us to do. That's the work that we were expected to do. So the commission is very broadly constructed. It's got legislators, members of the General Assembly. It's got the important agency heads that are involved in education, including the state superintendent. My successor is chancellor of the system. All of the sort of professional organizations that deal with education, the PTA, the superintendents have an organization, the local boards have the LEAs have an organization. They all have representation on the commission, including the collective bargaining units. 3 members of the public, 1 appointed by each of the governor, president of the Senate, and the speaker, and 1 member of the business community nominated by the Chamber of Commerce. So, you know, when you think about this, the construct of this commission, you can imagine that it's not exactly an easy thing to manage the discussion of this group, because everybody comes, or many of the people, most of the people on the commission come representing some organization. So they have a point of view that's reflective of their organization. And so it's been a real challenge to get people to, you know, rise to the occasion of thinking what's, yes, you've got to represent your group, but you've also got to focus on what's right for the state. I have been just incredibly impressed by the members of the commission, because they've done that. They've been very effective representing their groups, but they've also been able to come together and work in really quite a remarkable way. So, what have we learned? Well, so, you know, we're supposed to make policy recommendations, and incidentally, that's what we have focused on first, the policy recommendations, because you can't talk about funding until you know what it is you want to do. So we had to first sort of settle on what were the major policy recommendations, and so we had to do a lot of, we had to educate ourselves. We had to find out, where is Maryland if we're supposed to make recommendations so that we perform better, as well as the best performing systems in the world. We have to know, where is Maryland. So here's some little facts to think about as I go through the presentation. Maryland, we know, is the nation's highest median household income. It ranks 12th in per student K through 12 spending, 19th when adjusted for regional cost differences. Maryland has very significant, and the members, be interesting to see if this resonates with the folks on the Baltimore County Board. There are very significant teacher shortages, particularly at the secondary level and in the STEM disciplines. I'll tell you kind of a surprising statistic. Each year, the superintendents have to hire teachers to go into the classroom because people leave. Over half of the teachers we hire come from out of state, which shows you the shortage we have of teachers. And you know, it's great we can attract people from out of state, but think about it for a moment. You want teachers who've been prepared in our colleges and universities that are connected to the education, to the K through 12 education system. They know the curriculum. They've helped develop the curriculum. And so it's much more efficient for us to hire a large number of teachers from our teacher prep programs. Part of the reason we have such a shortage is that the average teacher salary, they're 40% below those of professions with comparable education requirements, CPAs, nurses, architects. Now, an issue Tim and I have been discussing, and we'll continue to discuss. Maryland underfunds, state plus local funds, schools serving low-income students. That is to say, if you look at the amount of money spent on students living in wealthy communities, and you look at the amount of money spent on schools serving low-income kids, and you look at the difference, Maryland, in this sense, is one of the most regressive states in the Union. There's in the U.S. You know, the various studies that have documented that. Some say we are we rank 35th in terms of funding equity for low-income kids. But one thing we have learned is that the really high-performing systems invest significantly in schools serving areas of concentrated poverty for lots of reasons that I think you could imagine.
What's a high-performing system?
I'm going to get to that in just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, just 1 second. So Maryland schools also significantly underperform on measures of student learning. Probably all of you or most of you have heard of NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress. That's an exam that is mandated by the federal government, and it is given to representative groups of 4th, 8th, and 12th grade students. I guess to all students, 4th, 8th, and 12th grade students. And it's the same exam given all across the country. And so here is where Maryland ranks on, now this isn't the recently released NAEP scores, but it might as well be because they didn't change. The Maryland was 29th in 4th grade math, 26th in 4th grade reading, and on, as you can see on the slide. Now, so basically, that says Maryland's kind of middle of the pack. We're not one of the worst performing, but we're a long way from one of the best performing systems in the United States. But that's bad enough, but if the U.S. was a top performer, and if we're in the middle of the pack of a top performing country, well, okay, maybe we can live with that. But we're not. So there's an exam called the Pisa Exam. People know what OECD, the organization OECD, does that resonate with anyone? There's an organization, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it's you should Google it sometime because they have data, unbelievable data, comparing performance on all sorts of different things for the most developed economies in the world. So if you want, yes, OECD. OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And one of the things they do is they compare student performance in the most advanced economies in the world. And here's what we see is, so they give a test in reading, math, and science to representative groups of 15-year-olds from the countries. And here's what you can see where the U.S. is. So look, we're down to 23rd in reading, 39th in math. That particularly pains me because I'm a mathematician. So you know, I hate seeing that. And 25th in science. And here's another thing that OECD did. They looked at the problem-solving skills using technology in technology-rich environments for adults between 16 and 34. And the U.S., you can see where it is. We're in the red bar. You can't read all the maybe all the other countries, but another sign that our education system is not producing students who perform as well as students in these more advanced, in these other advanced economies. So here's the harsh reality. Yes, please.
So I'm just skimming that.
Yeah.
The others, can you go back to that?
Sure.
Sorry. These seem to be rather small countries above us. I mean, how did that play into any of your evaluation, or you just assumed?
No, you know, and here's the in terms of the U.S.
Population.
Population-wise, yeah. Well, you know, we are one of the largest countries population-wise in the world, so most countries are smaller than we are. So, but
I'm wondering how fair of a comparison it is, because I think, I mean.
Well, if you go back to the Pisa exam, and this is just representative samples statistically taken from across the country and compared to how students are performing in these other countries. So it gives us at least some kind of signal as to how our students are performing. When you do a representative sample, it's kind of an average of what's in our country, and this is how it's comparing to these other countries. Somebody else had their hand up.
What was number one
What's that?
on the previous chart?
Oh, so the
Number one was Finland, number two was Japan.
Finland has got a phenomenal school system, yeah. They really have. Japan, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Korea, and on. Okay, so here's the harsh reality. Remember, we're supposed to make recommendations so our schools perform as well as the best performing schools in the world. That's our charge. And I think the harsh reality is that Maryland schools currently perform at a mediocre level in the country. You saw the NAEP scores. In a country that performs at a mediocre level globally. So that's not a pretty picture. Yes, please.
When you do all these comparisons, does that take private schools into consideration?
No, these are all public schools. Does not take private schools into consideration. But since public schools educate most of our kids, that's an important, the public schools have to be good in education if we're going to have.
I think this
highly
brings up an
educated
interesting
population.
point. What are your viewpoints of moving towards privatization through things like charter schools and school choice?
Yeah, well, that'd be a great question, maybe when I finish. I haven't even talked about charter schools. I'm actually on the board of a charter school, so I think charter schools can do a phenomenal job. I'm on the board of Bliss. Anybody ever hear of Bliss? Bliss is an awesome charter school in Baltimore City, doing phenomenal work. And KIPP, I've visited KIPP many times. I love KIPP. KIPP is a great school. So absolutely, there is a place for charters in our education system, and that's an issue that the commission will have to address. Okay. Okay. So what we know is that Maryland's economic future surely is dependent on our having a highly educated, highly skilled workforce. I mean, there was a time when I graduated from high school, believe it or not, back in the dark ages. I had high school graduates, classmates who went straight into the workforce, had a phenomenal career, retired, living well, and some of the rest of us went off to college. But in this day and age, with this economy, it's just hard to imagine how we're going to be able to maintain a very successful economy without a well-educated, globally competitive workforce. In today's world, high-quality education and skills training is the only path out of poverty. That's another thing. It's just very hard to find a good job unless you're well-educated. That's just the nature of the economy today. And you know, there's another thing that I hope we can, not this room, but the state can come to understand is that it's, of course, you want your local school to be good. We all do. But if the schools across the state aren't good, then we pay a price as a state. We don't have the high-skilled workforce. And when people don't move out of poverty, that imposes a cost on all of us. The social cost on all of us when people live in concentrated poverty generation after generation, that takes a toll on all of us. So it's in everybody's interest for us to have high-quality schools across the state. So the commission, that's kind of the background. The commission has had two consultants. One, this APA group, they're helping us with the updating of the funding formula. That's they're doing the green eye shade stuff, so to speak. Now, when I was asked to chair this commission, I thought to myself, how you bring in 25 people onto a commission who are volunteers, not all of them are involved in K through 12 education. How are we going to know where the best, what makes really high performing schools? Well, sometimes some power up there is looking after you. And in this case, somebody was looking after me, because it turns out that there is a really excellent think tank in Washington, D.C., a lot of think tanks in Washington, D.C., but there's this organization called the National Center on Education and the Economy. And they have spent the last 25 years studying what makes a strong school system. They've looked across the country. Why are some school systems good and others not good? What are the characteristics of a strong school system? Now, you know, they all exist in different parts of the globe. They have different social circumstances and economies. But what they have been able to do is identify what they call the 9 building blocks of high-performing school systems. And so what the commission has done, back to your question, is we've done a benchmark. We've gone through enormous effort to benchmark and do a gap analysis on these 9 building blocks between Maryland and these 7 school systems: Finland, Ontario, Shanghai, Singapore, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New Hampshire. And so, as I say, we've taken these 9 building blocks, and then we've done this rigorous benchmarking effort. And out of that, we have come up with 5 major areas of policy recommendations for our report. And they are, first of all, the importance of investing in early childhood education. All the high-performing systems make a significant investment in early childhood education. And the Commission will be recommending that the early childhood education be available to all 4-year-olds and all low-income 3-year-olds. This recommendation has very strong support across the Commission. Second policy recommendation is that we need to provide significantly more support for at-risk students. Students who have learning disabilities, etc., but in particular, students living in high concentrations of poverty. And here, we're thinking about things like community schools. I don't know if that's a term you're familiar with or not, but a community school is a school located in a high concentration of poverty, and they have a resource in that school that has connection to all sorts of social services that can come into the school and help these kids and their families. Students living in high concentrations of poverty don't have the academic enrichment. Yes?
I'm hearing you, and I agree with you 100%. I'm an educator for 27 years.
Right.
So my question is, as you give these recommendations,
Right.
they're not. Your recommendation is not in isolation.
Right.
It's to implement all 5 of these.
Absolutely.
In full force.
Right.
So you can't just say, okay, let's invest in early childhood.
Excellent point.
Oh, let's just invest in. The reason being is because the buzzword for the election season
Right.
is community schools.
Right.
And people who are talking about community schools are non-educators.
Right.
And they have no idea that this is how it should be incorporated.
Right.
And they're using it in isolation.
Right. Well, that's an excellent point, and the Commission is as one in saying that this is not gonna be a menu, you can pick one from column A and column A. It's a package of recommendations that come out of these 9 building blocks and lead to high-performing schools. And your point is very, very well taken. I just want to say that in the second recommendation, that in addition to the community school concept, these kids living in a high concentration of poverty don't have the kind of academic enrichment that kids, obviously, living in more affluent families do. So there needs to be academic enrichment after school. There needs to be summer enrichment programs for these kids. So that's sort of tied up in this more significant support for at-risk kids. Yes, sir?
Two quick
Sure.
ones. The first is, you say you benchmark against the 7, what is it, 3 states, 4 separate countries. Did you do a qualitative analysis of the different things that they were doing and the difference in outcomes, or did you just look at what they were doing and the fact that they were high performing and just kind of take them as a package?
With the help of NCEE, we were able to do a really in-depth of analysis and understand the nature of the programs that they had built in these schools.
I remember that there was a lot of research several years ago that said early childhood education did not produce noticeable outcomes after year 4. Have you done? Do you have additional information on that?
Yeah, we do. That's a very, I'm glad you raised that because that is a common concern. It isn't enough to have, just like kids go to early childhood education. It's the quality of the early childhood education. And so there has to be some standards set for what these early childhood education programs are. That's critically important. You have to have teachers that have been rigorously and carefully prepared to do early childhood education. You just can't have kind of a daycare center that takes these kids in. So it tied up into the early childhood education, the notion of the standards that need to be in place in order to produce the outcomes you want. Yes, ma'am?
All right, so I've been in education now for 25 years now that I'm old enough to be in something for 25 years.
You don't look
I mean, in it and through it, but I don't know how much time you've spent with these policy recommendations, but
A year and a half.
it's the same conversation that we've had for those 25 years, and if you're talking to a Republican club
Right.
about more government investment, at the end of the day, what's not included is the fact that all these issues are generational poverty
Right.
and prenatal care that
Right.
the children did not have before they were even born.
Right.
So I get you spending all the time focusing on education, but it's a societal problem
No question.
that we are all acting as if we have time to waste for more policy recommendations, where I'm just saying that this is not enough to deal with
Look,
what
I'm
we're
giving
dealing
you a
with in
summary
society.
of what we've done.
Okay.
If you take the report and read through it, there's 2 volumes, and it gets into great detail about what exactly we mean by early childhood education, what needs to go into it. Also, may I make one other point?
So if family reunification is not a part of that
Yeah.
plan, and community development specifically in reference to how people live and create these said communities, you can do all you can, we've all focused on what we can do for public
Right.
schools, but we haven't thought about the public.
Right. Well,
That's just my,
yeah, and with all due respect, I urge you to look at the report, because we have thought about that.
okay.
And we have recommendations on what should be happening with 0 to 3 in the report. Now that's not strictly speaking part of the K through 12 education funding formula, but we have clear policy recommendations on the 0 to 3 for kids growing up in concentrations of poverty, in poverty. Yes?
If you're losing teachers, they're the key point here. If your teachers are turning over and leaving, then doing all this is, especially in the lower grades. My brother taught for 44 years. He said most teachers take 2 or 3 years to get going and to know what they're really doing. If you're losing them by then you're just getting new people in, and they're not
What a
focusing.
great segue to my next bullet. Thank you.
And just
Thank you.
just saying the teachers, upgrading teachers, you gotta pay them more money. Don't waste money on that, just pay them more money
Yeah.
to keep them.
Well, I could actually, you've taken the words out of my mouth almost, but I'll go ahead and say what's in this recommendation. There is, in my mind, I think a lot of people would agree with, the single most important thing we can do is have really high quality teachers in front of the kids. I honestly believe if we can do that, things will take care of themselves. Now, what happens in high-performing school systems is teaching is seen as a high-status profession. It's a profession people want to go into. And we don't have that in the U.S. with one exception I'll get to in a moment. So part of this recommendation is that we have to rethink the profession of teaching and make it a high-status profession by raising standards for certification. To be a teacher in the state of Maryland, in many areas, you have to pass something called the praxis exam. You know what the pass rate is for the praxis exam? 98.5%. First time you take it. Well, that tells me that unless you get sick while you're taking the exam, you're going to pass it.
There are exceptions.
There are exceptions. There are. Some of the other areas have higher pass rates, but for a lot of the areas for certification,
Because they have combinations.
right,
They
it
can
is true. But we need to raise the certification standards for our teachers. We need to upgrade the quality of our teacher preparation programs so that teachers are prepared to meet these standards. We need to pay the teachers more, and the recommendation in the report is that once teacher standards, the credit certification standards have been raised, teacher preparation programs have been upgraded, that we should benchmark teacher salaries against other professions requiring the comparable level of education. That's what high-performing systems do. Okay, that's elicited a lot of hands, so let's have it. Go ahead. Yes, we'll start over there.
Thank you. It's my understanding that Baltimore City spends the second most behind Montgomery County per student. And when you look at the problems in Baltimore City, you have overcounting of students, and the state pays 75%. So they're basically cheating there. They cheated on those NASP tests, I believe, or whatever they are. Got caught cheating, teachers filling out, changing the answers. You have no heat in some schools. And my question really is, shouldn't the state of Maryland just take over Baltimore City schools, since Maryland as a whole is paying 75% of the freight, and clean out all the graft and cheating and baloney that goes on in the school system? I mean, how can students learn
Yeah, I mean,
in that environment?
yeah. Look, I can't, we haven't gotten into the issue of the state taking over a school district. I will say this, that I have gotten to know the new superintendent in Baltimore City, and I've been quite impressed with her. I think she is sincerely trying to make changes and do the right thing. But the issues you describe are the very ones we're trying to fix with these policy recommendations. Somebody else had their hand up. Yes, please.
I do a lot of work in the state for reading failure.
Uh-huh.
And, you were talking about higher education and about teacher preparation.
Right.
And what we're seeing is a massive gap between what has been shown as evidence-based methods for teaching reading specifically, and even even other things that have been out there with multisensory techniques of teaching, even the amount of recess that's appropriate, the amount of time, whatever it may be. There's a lot of scientific evidence out there from NIH studies and what have you of how these things should be done. But the way that teachers are being prepared in colleges and what's being implemented in the schools goes against 50 years of research.
Bingo. That's why we're talking
What?
about upgrading the teacher preparation program, so they have the kind of skills and knowledge that you're just now describing.
So is there a thought about implementing structured literacy at the college level?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
You have a high status profession as a pretty big goal. I'm concerned with the over-credentialization of teaching, that that a doctorate is better than a bachelor's and better than an associate's. But research is crystal clear. Schools of education are pulling from the bottom of the barrel of college students. If you can't do something else, you go into education as a college student. And my concern is that somebody who has, let's say, a bachelor's in education is qualified to teach mathematics, but a mathematician who's teaching at MIT who does not have a teaching credential is not qualified in most schools.
Right.
I don't know that we're talking at odds, because we're talking about upgrading the quality and knowledge and expertise of the teachers through higher certification standards, higher admission standards to colleges of education. Just to your point, last year, College Park admitted 4,500 freshman students. Let's see, somebody here,
I went to Maryland.
I know, but somebody's daughter, one of our candidates she had to leave, I guess. Okay, her daughter just graduated from the University of Maryland. So, anyway, there are 4,500 students admitted, and they all indicate what it is their career goal is. Of the 4,500, how many do you think chose teaching? 45. So, we're not going to get there, folks, if we don't change the expectations, the quality, and the compensation for teachers. One of the things that is part of this recommendation of this third bullet is that we want to we're recommending the implementation of a career ladder for teachers. I mean, here's one of the crazy things we have in the state. If you're a teacher, a really good teacher, but you got a family, and you got to earn more money, what are your options? Well, you can leave teaching and go get another job, or you can go into administration. So we've got, we want to have a career ladder, as other high-performing systems do, so that really good teachers can stay in teaching if they choose to do so. Yes, sir.
Okay, I have to look at this from a different perspective. Thank you for coming and thank you for taking the time. I currently am very friendly with a young lady who graduated from Mercy, then Loyola, and got her teaching certificate. Entire time she was on the honor roll and graduated cum laude. She currently teaches fourth grade at Glendon Elementary. Okay? She is unable to discipline the children. She had a child. One day she thought she'd do a nice thing and bring in candy for the children. One of the children went into her purse, stole the candy, stole her phone. Child was not disciplined. Children wander the halls. I could go on and on. So, I hear about the money, I hear about the think tanks, I hear about all that. Let's use Delaney real quick. There was one time when Delaney was a blue ribbon school. There was also one time when Delaney was one of, I think, the top 10 high schools in the nation. No longer at Delaney are there artisan trade classes where there used to be a full body shop, metal shop, and also wood shop. Notwithstanding the fact, the breakdown of the family, you've got kids right here, right now, it's 8 o'clock and they're still over there. Also, God is no longer allowed in public schools.
Here, here.
Yeah. So do you think something needs to be changed?
I think, quite frankly, more
That was
thing.
a rhetorical question.
Let me say one more thing. Also, I Googled it on this little computer. In the 50s, the United States was number one.
I know they were. We gotta get back there.
But
Let
we
me make one other
spent, we
point to
spent
your
far
comment.
less
Yeah.
per student back then, and there was the family unit was a
So
whole.
let me just, let's be honest. We're not gonna change the social structure of a lot of the family situation that the kids are growing up in the next 10 years. That ain't gonna happen. So, are we just gonna sit back and do nothing?
So why do you assume you can't do it in 10 years? 'Cause I think
Well, oh, okay, you can do it in 10 years.
You can
Okay.
start.
All right, you can start.
You can
Yeah,
start, and
okay.
that's
But we're not gonna change it overnight.
But what I'm telling you is,
Yes,
having worked in this space, more
Right.
so than most people in this room,
yes.
you're wasting your time if you don't start.
Did
Because people have assumed that the government is going to be someone's
Do
parent.
you know what's gonna make the change? When these kids
The
get a good
indi- no,
education.
the individual.
When these kids get a good
When they-
education.
when
Let
they
me go back to
learn
his,
that they
see,
have
You have to be
Mercy.
ready to receive
Mer-
it.
wherever she graduated, they failed. Our preparation programs are not preparing the teachers to deal with the circumstances they meet in the classroom. That's why we've got to change the nature of
What option does the teacher have if the kid is stealing from him?
I agree with you 100%. She didn't go to college to be a cop in the classroom.
Right.
And again, I think it goes back to the family. If a fourth grader is stealing, acting out, running around the hallway, with all due respect, what is the school that Babe Ruth went to? They were called industrial schools or something. There are certain schools, if a couple of children, and she's one teacher with 30 students at Glendon. So let's just make it real even math. If 20% of those students, 6 students, are acting out incredibly every day, preventing her, who is a highly skilled, very smart young lady, preventing the majority of kids from getting a good education because they want to learn, why not simply extract those kids like we did? I'm 57 years old, and I remember special ed kids when I was in school, and they weren't ostracized or anything. Why not take, it would cost a lot less money to put them in special needs scenarios.
You had your hand up.
I wanted to say, again, as you were saying, preparing teachers. One of the things that is not taught in college, and this is on my bucket list, so we can talk. On my bucket list,
She's talking.
okay, on my bucket list, I want to create a class, a course for prospective teachers on classroom management skills. Because we learn everything about our subject matter in schools, but we don't learn about classroom management skills. It doesn't matter what school you're in. You could be in the top richest school in the country, or you could be in the lowest school in the country. If you cannot manage what's in your 4 walls, the children will take over, period. And so when you talk about taking over, when you talk about the kids and the discipline, yes, there are tons of things. Because of the policies that the school boards have implemented, it does tie the hands of the teachers. And there aren't many things that, as a teacher, that we can do. And you can sit here, we can talk all night about the symptoms and what's going on. We already know what's wrong. And so
I'm gonna call a halt to the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. Until I finish, and then I'll stay here as long as you want, but I'm gonna finish the presentation. And then you can want or you can go. All right, so the fourth bullet is, we need to develop a much more rigorous and tightly aligned curriculum, starting at preschool, with leading to college and career-ready standards in the 10th grade. Right now, they're in the 11th grade. If you want to be college and career-ready, you have to pass the PARCC exam with a level of 4 in the 11th grade. That's too late. to know where kids are headed. So, because let's say you don't meet the standard in the 11th grade. Well, by the time you got the information, you're in the 12th grade. And you don't have enough time to correct the deficiencies. So, we want to make high school a much richer experience for our students. I've had grandchildren who've done well in school. Their senior year in high school was a waste. And I hear that from a lot of folks. So we want to move the assessment for are you on path to college and career ready to the 10th grade. If you're not, then you've got 2 years to help these kids get ready. But if you are, we want to have pathways in the high school. You can have a pathway that would start with early college. Let kids get some college credits while they're still in high school. You can have AP. We'd have a whole AP curriculum. We would also have a very rigorous career and technical education pathway that would lead to an industry certification for the graduates. So you would have the 11th and 12th grade for kids to have internships, to become a certified plumber, a welder. Welding's very sophisticated these days. An IT programmer. So we want to move this back to the 10th grade and then use the last 2 years of high school to really get these kids ready for life. Whether they're going to college or they're going to go into an industry, go into a place, go straight into work with an industry certified credential in a profession where they have the opportunity for career advancement. The 5th bullet, significantly strengthen governance and accountability. A lot of people said, Thornton, we put all this money in and we didn't get the results. Well, I know Alvin Thornton, and I talked to him. What went wrong, Alvin? And he said the accountability broke down. So money was invested, but there wasn't a rigorous accountability system in place. So part and parcel of our recommendation is that we need to significantly increase accountability and tie the some of the new funding that comes to evidence that school districts have implemented the recommendations. Okay, I'm almost done. I just want to say one other thing about I feel so strongly about it because I think our recommendations will go nowhere unless the public feels there truly is a system of accountability here that will hold people accountable for not having results. So without strong system of accountability, I don't think we will have the public support. And as I say, the Commission is committed to tying some portion of any new funds that occur into evidence that there is greater accountability. So we've issued our preliminary recommendations. A lot of the questions you're asking and comments about, well, did you do this? Well, you did. It's in the report. Please look at that report. It's got a lot of information about much greater specificity on these 5 areas of recommendation. There was bills passed in the last session by the House and General Assembly to sort of give a jump start to the Commission recommendations. And so let me just conclude with the next steps. So we made these preliminary policy recommendations with the 5 buckets with lots of detail. We're going to finalize those. And then we're going to conduct a detailed cost analysis using new and existing funds. Now I want to make this point because I think it's very important, and I suspect this will resonate with at least some people in this room, that we're not talking about just new money. We're talking about changing the way we do things. So if we are doing some things differently, that means that there are areas where we were spending money that we're not going to be spending it anymore. So the Commission is totally committed to a reallocation of funds to support some of the recommendations. It's a very, very important point, and I think if we don't do that, our report won't have credibility. So my final thoughts, I'm a great believer in the commission. I'm just in awe of these people. They've been great to work with. I am confident that we're going to produce a meaningful report. But I'm less confident that at the end of the day, the state will have the will to make these changes. This is going to be tough. This is going to be really tough to do. And the question is, will we, as a state, come together and make this happen? Now, I want to cite one state. It's Massachusetts. Now, it turns out Massachusetts, back in the 80s, did something like we're doing right now with the commission. And they didn't know about the 9 building blocks, but they kind of discovered some of the elements of high-performing systems on their own. And they made significant reform in their K-12 program. They, and they did what I was talking about just a moment ago. They upgraded the teaching profession. They paid higher certification standards, better teacher preparation programs, much better pay for teachers. And guess what? If Massachusetts was a country all by itself, it would rank number 5 on the Pisa exam. Think back a moment ago when I said we ranked 29th in some areas on the Pisa exam. Massachusetts would rank 5th in the world. Now I ask you, if Massachusetts can do it, why can't Maryland? So I just, you know, this can be done, but it's not going to be easy. So, you know, I really think this is a huge moment for our state, because there's not going to be another commission in the next 10 or 15 years. It's now or never. So we can do nothing. Let's just keep on keeping on. And we can be 29th on the NAEP exam. We can be, and you know, have miserable performance, particularly for students in high concentrations of poverty. Hope maybe things will get a little better. Or we can be bold and create a new vision and future for the children of Maryland that will be to the benefit of all of us. That's my story, folks, and I'm sticking to it. All right.
Two pertinent points.
Sure.
The commission didn't recommend, or they didn't have the vision.
Right.
Number one is, we have to raise the standards of the college professors in education. They're some of the poorest of all the professors. And number two is, most principals and many teachers don't have any leadership skills. And if they had leadership skills, we wouldn't have the fighting and the dying in the schools. They're not taught leadership skills, and they don't have the ability to do it unless they're taught and they practice.
Well, I appreciate those points, but I just want to say they are in the report. We've talked about upgrading the standards and quality of the teacher preparation programs with better faculty, and also leadership training for our principals, and a better way of preparing teachers to serve in the classrooms that they will be teaching in. Okay, now we'll go to this young lady right here.
You said that there were only 45 people that decided they wanted to go into teaching. The reason being is what they were talking about over on that side. There's no way a teacher can handle these disciplined kids because they're just slapped on the wrist. I taught 50 years ago. There was no union. If you want teachers to be a profession, do we have doctors' unions? Do we have lawyer unions? No.
Yes.
Teachers, if they want to be professional, should be no union. Anyway, the discipline in the classroom, I don't care if you have organization skills or whatever. The discipline has got to be there. And but the principals don't back the teachers up, and the school board doesn't back up. So the teachers are left. So nobody wants to do it. I told somebody on the council, Baltimore County Council, back in the 80s, I wouldn't go back into the classroom if you gave me $1 million because of the discipline in the classroom.
Yeah. But
The way the kids act up.
let me, I'd love to take you on a visit to a high school. I wish I could remember the name of the high school, but they have an awesome principal. This is a school that is serving, in a district, very high concentration of poverty. You go in that school, you see an unbelievably dedicated set of teachers. Students sitting at their desk doing work. Leadership makes a difference. And
That's
so
why I said you have to have.
that's what we're talking about in this report, is to have a different caliber of principal leading these schools. We got to train the principals better. Yes.
Did the commission, just real simple, did the commission recommend removing the requirement that someone go to a school of education if they have a professional degree in a particular subject that they be teaching? And did the commission recommend alternative schools so that problem students could be removed and not disrupt normal education?
Right. Well, you know, you can't be, according to the standards in Maryland, they're not high enough yet, you can't be a math teacher at the secondary level unless you have a math degree, not a math education degree, a math degree. So that's already in the policies of the state. Yes?
Yeah, I don't think that we can have a real discussion about education without having a discussion about free markets. I mean, over the past 80 years, the government's grown while the private sector has contracted. That's been at the expense of our liberties and our freedoms.
Right.
And there's an old saying, your economic resources should follow the economic choices you make.
Right.
And that applies to education.
Right.
And I think that if we had things like, as mentioned earlier, like school choice, parents would have more money in hand, they could send their kids to private school. And by the way, a private entity is subject to profit and loss. Public schools are not.
Right.
And so profit and loss goes a long way by instilling accountability.
So are you
never,
including charter schools in this?
yeah, you're never
Okay.
gonna have
Well, charter schools are
accountability.
public schools.
What I was gonna say, you're never gonna have accountability with a public entity that's not subject to profit and loss.
Yeah. Well, Massachusetts has figured it out, and they have a union. Yes, sir.
Baltimore City Schools, aren't they funded to something like $19,000 per
No,
student?
not that high.
How much is it?
17, yeah.
All right,
I think
how
it's
much, excuse me, how much is Montgomery and Baltimore County?
I don't have those numbers.
But they're considerably lower.
They're in your pocket, I gave
They're a little bit
Yeah,
lower.
I don't have them.
Now,
Montgomery's 19, Baltimore's 17.
Oh, Montgomery is, okay.
so is the most funding going to the districts that have the highest concentration of poverty, the
No.
lowest incomes?
No. You may find a district where that's true, but that's not true across the state.
Well, you know, you talk, I mean, accountability, excuse me,
Sure. Yes.
accountability is extraordinarily important, and everybody always says accountability, no matter what they're talking about, but there never is any accountability. Once the hoopla and all the balloons are released, there's no accountability.
Read our final report and see if you think we have a realistic accountability plan.
But I mean, the real problem in the state is the politicians and the unions that control everything.
Well, I mean, just
And that's something
remember,
you have no control over.
just remember this now. We had,
unions on the commission.
I will say this for the unions. We're talking about a whole different way of evaluating teachers. A career ladder where performance will determine, okay,
But you have the
you don't let me finish, please let me finish.
the black swan issue.
The unions have supported this recommendation. So you've got the representative of the Chamber of Commerce and representatives of the teacher union coming together on what we are proposing to do to change the nature of the teaching profession. I think that's a minor miracle. Who's up next? Yes.
Not every, you have above average, average, and below average students.
Right.
Do you have anything in the commission on what you would do for the education and employability of those students who have below average intelligence?
Well, now, are you talking about special ed kids that can?
Well, they don't have to be
No, they're not.
special
Right.
educators. I mean,
Absolutely.
if you look at a bell
Right.
curve,
Yeah.
and I'm not being demeaning of
Right.
anybody,
Right.
with automation
Right,
on the one hand, and then the need for high technical
Right.
skills on the other,
right.
you have a group that may not have
Well, I
anything for them to
mean,
do. I'm just asking.
I don't know whether you would consider the career and technical education path we're talking about, that leads to an industry certified credential.
Okay.
That's what exists in the best system. So the kids have they have an option, they have a path. They want to go to college, they've got a path through high school that does that. If they want to go into the workforce and be an IT person or a master plumber, there is a path with this career and technical education that leads to a certification, and they're ready to go to work.
Okay.
Yes.
As Dr. Kirwan is saying, virtually everything that's being asked here is being addressed in this report. I can give everybody the link to the report. There are 59 recommendations, if I remember correctly. One of the things that's really not addressed and that will be addressed as they go forward is what this is going to cost.
Right, that's what we're doing now, we're costing it out.
And so this is this. These are preliminary recommendations, but we are looking at a situation, quite honestly, of abject failure. Right now, the school system is, in many parts of the state, in abject failure. Last question.
To that point, Baltimore City, only 12% of students are reading proficiently. In Baltimore County, that's only 40% are reading proficiently, so we have a very low literacy rate across the board. We do have some of the best schools in Maryland that really do address reading failure, like Odyssey and Genesee and Summit, and some of these private schools are very expensive that have a structured literacy approach. Because that's really the foundation of all learning now for reading, math. I mean, you can't be college career ready if you can't read. Is there any thought of looking at some of these private schools, and even private schools that do other things like international baccalaureate programs, for example, to try to take, Baltimore County actually did do that, by the way. They invested heavily in this, and they actually went to these schools, looked at what they were doing, and they tried to implement them in the public school setting, which has been very successful. Has there been a thought about trying to do that, to look at some of these schools that are successful?
Absolutely, that's part of the information base that we've gathered. So the IB track in high school is mentioned specifically in the report.
So I can send out to everybody the link to the preliminary recommendations. Dr. Kirwan, I want to thank you. You're so